Every terrible idea has a moment of conception where it feels like pure genius. This video is about 10 of those moments and the fatal slide from "I got this" to "I've made a huge mistake." These are cautionary tales, not inspirational stories. Do not get inspired. 1. In the heart of a bustling shopping mall, a man named Barry was living in a fishbowl, and he was loving it. He was the star contestant in a radio station's audacious publicity stunt. Live in the box, win the car. For 30 days, his home was a large, seamless glass cube in the mall's central atrium, a temporary monument to human endurance. The prize, a gleaming red sports car parked just outside his transparent prison, was a constant, tantalizing reminder of the goal. For 29 days, Barry had been a master of his domain. He had become a local celebrity, a human Tamagotchi for shoppers who would tap on the glass and wave. To make his prolonged stay bearable, he'd been allowed a few creature comforts, including a small, single-burner camping stove. The radio station, more concerned with ratings than risk assessment, saw it as a quirky, humanizing detail. To Barry, it was a small piece of normalcy, a way to have a hot meal in his surreal, hermetically sealed world. The danger of operating a combustion-based appliance with a pressurized fuel canister in a poorly ventilated enclosed space was a thought that never seemed to cross anyone's mind. On the morning of day 30, the air was thick with anticipation. The finish line was just hours away. A crowd was already forming, news cameras were setting up, and Barry was mentally polishing the hood of his new car. But inside the glass box, a silent, invisible countdown of a different kind had begun. The cheap propane canister attached to his stove, likely damaged from being moved around for a month, had developed a slow, insidious leak. Colorless, odorless, and heavier than air, the propane gas began to pool at the bottom of the box, creeping upwards, slowly displacing the oxygen and creating a perfectly calibrated, highly volatile fuel-air mixture. Barry, lost in his victory fantasies, was completely oblivious. The final, fatal element was introduced by his mini-fridge. As its internal temperature rose slightly, its thermostat sent a signal to the compressor to kick on. Deep within the machine's mechanics, a tiny, routine electrical switch closed, creating a microscopic, insignificant spark. In any normal environment, this spark would be harmless. But in Barry's glass box, which had unknowingly become a contained fuel-air bomb, it was the detonator. The resulting explosion was instantaneous and shockingly violent. The glass cube, his home for a month, was vaporized in a deafening fireball, sending a shockwave and a shower of glass shards across the atrium. Barry, who had endured a month of public scrutiny and confinement, was consumed in the very last hours of his trial by a lethal combination of a leaky stove, a functioning refrigerator, and a catastrophic lack of foresight. He had won the contest, but he never got to claim his prize. 2. The Grand Canyon is a place of silent, majestic beauty, a geological masterpiece that inspires awe and a profound sense of one's own insignificance. It is also, quite simply, a place with a lot of very big, very unforgiving drops. For a tourist named Leo, a man whose entire personality was built on being the hilarious prankster of his friend group, this majestic landscape was simply a stage for his next bit. As he and his friends hiked along the popular South Rim Trail, Leo discovered a new, heart-stopping routine. He would wander dangerously close to an unfenced edge, then, with theatrical flair, pretend to trip and stumble, flailing his arms wildly as if he were about to be swallowed by the abyss. The first time he did it, it worked perfectly. His friends shrieked in genuine terror, their faces a mask of horror, only for Leo to catch himself at the last second and burst into triumphant laughter. The intoxicating mix of their relief and anger was the attention he craved. But a good joke, in Leo's mind, was worth repeating. And repeating. With each subsequent prank, the reactions grew weaker. The screams of terror were replaced by annoyed groans. "Dude, stop it, that's not funny," became the new refrain. Their fear was curdling into weary resentment, but Leo, high on his own performance, didn't notice. He was an artist, and this was his masterpiece. For his grand finale, he chose a particularly dramatic overlook, a sheer drop of over 1,000 feet. "Okay guys, you gotta watch this one, it's gonna be the best one yet," he announced. He then launched into his most elaborate fake stumble to date, a full-body convulsion of feigned peril that ended with him on one knee, panting, inches from the edge. He held the pose, a smug grin on his face, waiting for the applause that never came. His friends were already walking on, tired of his game. Satisfied, he pushed himself up. To admire his own performance, to punctuate the moment, he took a single, casual step backward. But the spot where he placed his heel was not solid rock. It was a patch of loose, crumbly gravel. His foot slid out from under him. This time, there was no acting. The smug grin on his face was instantly wiped away, replaced by a wide-eyed, silent mask of pure terror. There was no time to flail, no time to scream. He simply disappeared. He vanished over the edge, swallowed by the vast, indifferent silence of the canyon. His friends, hearing the scuffle of gravel, turned back, expecting to see him laughing. Instead, they saw nothing. The prankster who had spent all day crying wolf had finally met the real one, and it had a sense of irony as deep and as dark as the canyon itself. 3. In the rugged, beautiful coastal cliffs of Wales, a man named Rhys, a passionate amateur ornithologist, had found his holy grail, a nest of the rare and elusive chough, perched precariously on a sheer cliff face. Getting a photograph of the chicks was his obsession. The nest was 100 feet down, a seemingly impossible location. But Rhys was a man of ingenuity, a firm believer in the power of a good DIY solution. He decided to rappel down the cliff, and he had the perfect anchor, his trusty Land Rover. His plan was a model of simplicity. He would tie one end of his climbing rope to the car's solid steel tow hitch, the other to his harness, and descend. It seemed foolproof. He drove his vehicle to the edge, meticulously tied his knots, checked his harness, and prepared for his adventure. He was so intensely focused on the immediate details, the rope, the carabiners, the descent path, that he overlooked the most critical, most fundamental component of his entire safety system. In his focused excitement, he had left the car in neutral. He had forgotten to set the handbrake. The patch of grass he had parked on had a very slight, almost imperceptible downward slope towards the edge. With his gear set, Rhys confidently tossed the rest of the rope over the cliff and began to lean back, putting his full weight onto the line. For a brief moment, the system held. But that extra pull, the weight of a grown man, was just enough to overcome the rolling resistance of the tires. With a slow, almost gentle groan, the Land Rover began to creep forward. Rhys, now dangling 20 feet down the cliff face, felt a terrifying lurch as the rope suddenly went slack, then pulled him sharply upwards. He looked up in confusion, and his blood turned to ice. He saw his anchor, his four-wheeled bastion of safety, its tires slowly, inexorably, rolling towards the same precipice he was suspended over. He was being reeled in by his own colossal mistake. Panic seized him. He scrambled at the rock face trying to find a handhold, but it was useless. He could only watch in a state of silent primal horror as the front wheels of his car nosed over the edge, hesitated for a gravity-defying moment, and then plunged downwards, dragging the rest of the vehicle, and him, along with it in a final, fatal cascade of steel, rope, and shattered ambition. 4. Being late for your own birthday party is a minor social faux pas, a small inconvenience in the grand scheme of things. For a young, newly licensed driver in Germany named Klaus, however, it felt like a catastrophic failure. He was racing down the Autobahn, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, the speedometer needle creeping well past the suggested limit. He was already 30 minutes late, and the thought of his friends waiting, of the party starting without him, filled him with a frantic, youthful anxiety. It was in this state of panicked haste that he saw the dreaded blue flashing lights in his rearview mirror. A police car. His heart sank. A speeding ticket was bad enough, but he was still on his probationary license, and a ticket like this could mean losing it altogether. As the police car signaled for him to pull over, a truly terrible, movie-inspired idea sparked in his panicked brain. He looked over at his friend, Sven, who was sitting calmly in the passenger seat. He couldn't get the ticket. He couldn't lose his license. Therefore, he concluded, he couldn't be the one driving. His plan, a masterpiece of high-speed, low IQ thinking, was to switch seats with Sven while the car was still moving at 60 miles per hour. "We have to switch," he yelled over the roar of the engine. Sven looked at him as if he had grown a second head. "Are you insane? Just pull over." But Klaus was not a man to be reasoned with. He was a man with a very bad plan, and he was fully committed. He unbuckled his seatbelt, a move that should have been a final blaring alarm bell in his head, and began to awkwardly clamber over the center console. For a brief chaotic moment, two people were trying to occupy the driver's seat, and no one was actually driving. The car, now without a pilot, began to drift lazily from its lane. Klaus, tangled up with his friend, his feet nowhere near the pedals, could only watch in horror as they veered directly into the path of a large semi-truck in the next lane. The truck driver, who had been watching this bizarre in-car ballet with disbelief, had no time to react. The impact was devastating. The small car was swatted aside like a fly, crumpling into a mangled heap of steel and shattered glass. Klaus's desperate high-speed attempt to avoid a piece of paper had resulted in a catastrophic fatal collision. He never made it to his birthday party, a tragic and permanent absentee at his own celebration, all because he chose a solution that was infinitely more destructive than the problem he was trying to solve. 5. The deep, silent, blue-black world of the ocean's abyss holds a powerful allure for a certain kind of person. For a freediver named Antoine, it was his cathedral, a place of peace and extreme challenge. He was a master of his craft, capable of holding his breath for astonishing lengths of time, his body conditioned to withstand the immense pressures of the deep. But Antoine was not content with being merely excellent. He wanted to be a legend. His goal was to break the world record for the deepest scuba dive on a single, unassisted breath of air, a feat that pushes the absolute limits of human physiology. He had trained for years, perfecting his breathing techniques, his mental focus, and his physical endurance. On the day of the record attempt, conditions were perfect. The water was calm and clear. He took his final, enormous breath, a technique known as packing, forcing every last molecule of oxygen into his lungs, and began his descent. He followed the guide rope down, a solitary figure disappearing into the ever-darkening blue. He passed the 100-meter mark, then 150. The pressure was immense, crushing his chest, but his training held. He was in his element. He reached his target depth, a place of near-total darkness and unimaginable pressure, and successfully grabbed the tag that would verify his record. He had done it. But as he turned to begin his ascent, something was wrong. At these extreme depths, the high pressure forces nitrogen from the air in the lungs to dissolve into the bloodstream, inducing a powerful, disorienting state known as nitrogen narcosis, or the rapture of the deep. It's a euphoric, dreamlike intoxication that severely impairs judgment. Antoine had trained to resist it, but on this dive, he had pushed himself too far. The narcosis hit him like a tidal wave. The cold, dark, and dangerous abyss was suddenly transformed in his mind. He was no longer a human visitor in a hostile environment. The disorientation and euphoria convinced him that he had finally transformed, that he had become what he had always felt he was, a creature of the sea, a fish. He felt a profound sense of belonging, of coming home. The urgent need to return to the surface, to the air his body so desperately needed, vanished from his mind, replaced by a blissful, serene happiness. Instead of kicking upwards, he let go of the guide rope and, with a gentle, contented smile, began to swim happily further down, deeper into the crushing black emptiness. He had conquered the deep, but in his moment of triumph, the deep had conquered his mind, luring him to a peaceful, poetic, and utterly tragic end. 6. In the bleak, windswept landscape of a remote Russian coastline, two men, Ivan and Boris, were on the hunt. They weren't hunting for animals. They were hunting for scrap metal, combing the beaches for anything of value that the sea might have offered up. One gray afternoon, they hit the jackpot. Washed up on the shingle, half buried in the sand, was a long, cylindrical, rust-covered object, a decommissioned military torpedo. It was a relic of the Cold War, a massive, menacing piece of hardware. To the local authorities, it would have been a public menace to be dealt with by the bomb squad. To Ivan and Boris, it was a floating treasure chest. They knew that military equipment was often made with high-quality, valuable metals like copper and brass, and they imagined the fortune that lay hidden beneath the torpedo's rusted steel shell. Their first assumption, a critical and fatal one, was that since it was decommissioned, it must be completely inert and harmless. Their plan to get at the valuable metals inside was a testament to their reckless optimism. They decided to open it up with a cutting torch. They dragged the heavy torpedo further up the beach, away from the prying eyes of any potential authorities, and set up their equipment. Boris fired up the oxyacetylene torch, its brilliant hissing flame a stark contrast to the gray, overcast sky. He lowered the flame to the torpedo's thick casing and began to cut. What they failed to understand was that decommissioned doesn't always mean empty. While the main explosive warhead had likely been removed, the torpedo still contained a significant amount of residual solid rocket propellant. The intense heat from the cutting torch did exactly what intense heat is designed to do to rocket fuel. It ignited it. With a violent, roaring whoosh, the propellant ignited, turning the torpedo's body into a makeshift rocket engine. But the tragedy didn't stop there. The warhead, while missing its main charge, still contained its original powerful detonator charge, a smaller but still highly potent explosive designed to initiate the main blast. The heat and pressure from the burning propellant was more than enough to cook off this secondary charge. The resulting explosion was small by military standards, but for the two men standing right next to it, it was apocalyptic. The blast tore the torpedo and them to pieces. Their salvage operation had come to a sudden, violent, and very final end. A grim lesson that when you find military-grade hardware on a beach, the best tool to use is always a telephone. 7. The discovery of a suspicious, unmarked package on one's doorstep is a universal trigger for a primal, fight-or-flight response. For a man in Washington named Arthur, a creature of routine and quiet predictability, it was an unwelcome intrusion of chaos into his orderly world. He found the plain, brown-wrapped box, devoid of any return address or familiar markings, and immediately, his mind raced with grim possibilities. He made the first, and arguably most important, correct decision of the day. He didn't touch it more than necessary. He didn't shake it. He carefully carried it to his car and drove directly to the local police station, a commendable act of civic responsibility. He presented the package to the desk sergeant, and the station's protocols instantly clicked into place. The lobby was cleared, the area was cordoned off, and the bomb squad was summoned. Arthur's good judgment, however, appeared to be a finite resource that he had just completely exhausted. As he stood outside, watching the methodical, painstakingly slow process of the bomb squad through a window, his initial caution began to curdle into a strange, aggressive impatience. He saw their robots, their scanners, their heavy blast shields, and interpreted their caution not as professionalism, but as inefficiency. He started to feel foolish, a man who had caused a massive fuss over what was probably just a poorly mailed fruitcake. In a breathtaking leap of anti-logic, he decided that he, a man with zero training in explosive ordnance disposal, could resolve this situation faster. He strode back into the now empty, cordoned-off lobby, brushing past a stunned officer who tried to stop him. He walked directly up to the lead bomb technician, who was in the middle of a delicate remote examination. "This is ridiculous, it's taking forever," Arthur announced, with the indignant air of a man whose time was being wasted. Before the technician could even process the civilian intrusion, Arthur snatched the package from the examination table. He held it up to his face as if it were a gift he was trying to guess the contents of. "Well, what do you think it is?" he asked, and to emphasize his question, he gave the box a vigorous, violent shake. The device inside, which was indeed a very real and very unstable homemade pipe bomb, was not designed to withstand such aggressive handling. The impact-sensitive trigger mechanism did exactly what it was designed to do. The resulting explosion was not massive, but at point-blank range, it was brutally effective. It answered Arthur's question with a definitive, deafening, and very final roar. He had successfully identified a threat, successfully brought it to the experts, and then, in a final, spectacular act of hubris and impatience, had successfully nominated himself to be its sole and immediate victim. 8. In the brightly lit, sterile aisles of a suburban convenience store, a man in a wheelchair named Frank was formulating a heist. His target, a 24-pack of cold, crisp lager. His method what he believed to be a foolproof plan that weaponized his disability as a shield against suspicion. He glided his chair down the beer aisle, his movements smooth and practiced. With a single, fluid motion, he plucked a heavy case of beer from the cooler and settled it precariously onto his lap. It was a bulky, awkward, and unstable load, but to Frank, it was the key to his victory. His strategy was built on a simple, cynical calculation. No one would dare stop or question a man in a wheelchair. He would simply roll out the front door, a picture of disabled entitlement, and no one would be the wiser. He navigated his way to the front of the store, past the cashier, his face a mask of nonchalant confidence. The automatic doors slid open, revealing his final gateway to freedom. A short, but surprisingly steep, concrete wheelchair ramp leading down to the parking lot. This ramp, a feature mandated by accessibility laws, was about to become an instrument of brutal, ironic justice. He began his descent, but he had failed to account for the fundamental laws of physics. The addition of the heavy, high center of gravity case of beer on his lap had completely and catastrophically altered the wheelchair's balance. As he rolled down the incline, the chair began to pick up speed. The unbalanced load made the chair wobble violently from side to side. Frank, now in a frantic struggle to both steer and keep the beer from sliding off, was losing control. Halfway down the ramp, the battle was lost. The chair's small front wheels caught on a slight imperfection in the concrete, and the chair, already critically unbalanced, pitched forward. Frank was ejected from his seat in a clumsy, uncontrolled arc, his body tumbling headfirst down the hard concrete slope. The case of beer, the entire reason for his ill-fated mission, flew from his grasp and burst open upon impact, sending 24 cans skittering and fizzing across the asphalt in a final, mocking celebration of his failure. The fall, however, was no joke. He landed with a sickening crunch, his head and neck taking the full force of the impact against the unyielding pavement. His perfect, low-stakes crime had instantly escalated into a high-stakes, life-or-death medical emergency. He had been so focused on the social engineering aspect of his theft that he had completely ignored the simple, mechanical dangers of his plan, a fatal oversight that turned a case of stolen beer into the most expensive purchase of his life. 9. The intoxicating allure of a death-defying stunt can often blind a person to the most obvious of dangers. For a man in Virginia named Kevin, the stage for his grand performance was a rusty, 70-foot-high railroad trestle, a skeletal finger of steel pointing over a shallow, rock-strewn river. He was going to perform a solo bungee jump, a DIY masterpiece of adrenaline and what he believed was meticulous planning. Kevin was, in his own mind, a careful and methodical man. He had purchased a brand new 60-foot bungee cord from a reputable online dealer. He spent an entire afternoon on the bridge with a heavy-duty measuring tape, confirming the height of the jump. 70 feet from the railing to the rocks below. Check. He then laid out his bungee cord and measured it. 60 feet. Perfect. The math seemed unassailable. A 70-foot drop with a 60-foot cord. That left a generous 10-foot safety margin. It was, in his mind, foolproof. He was so supremely confident in his calculations that the idea of a test jump with a weighted dummy seemed like a waste of time. On the day of the jump, he stood on the precipice, the wind whistling through the steel beams. His heart was a drum solo of excitement. He expertly fastened the cord to his ankles into a solid-looking girder. He took one last look at the stunning view, a deep, triumphant breath, and launched himself into the void. The first 60 feet of the fall were pure, unadulterated ecstasy. The wind roared in his ears. The ground rushed up to meet him. It was everything he had dreamed of. He was a bird, an eagle, a god of gravity. But as he passed the 60-foot mark, he was introduced to a fundamental property of the very equipment he was using, a property he had somehow completely ignored: elasticity. The bungee cord, a product designed specifically to stretch, began to do its job. It stretched with the immense kinetic energy of his falling body, elongating far beyond its static 60-foot length. It stretched 10 feet, easily consuming his entire safety margin. Then it stretched 15, then 20. The triumphant rush he had felt moments before was instantly replaced by a cold, sickening, and irreversible understanding of his mistake. Instead of being whipped back up towards the sky in a thrilling rebound, he continued his descent at near-terminal velocity, the cord still stretching, until he met the rocky riverbed below with a brutal, final impact. His meticulously planned stunt had failed not because of faulty equipment, but because of a faulty understanding of the most basic principle of how that equipment worked. 10. The act of mowing one's lawn is, for many, a peak suburban ritual, a monotonous but generally safe chore performed on a sunny afternoon. For a man named George, this routine task was about to escalate into a full-scale, one-sided war he was not equipped to win. As he guided his roaring lawnmower across his backyard, he made a pass near a large, ancient oak tree. He failed to notice a gray, paper-like object, the size of a football, tucked away on a low-hanging branch. It was a hornet nest, and the low, rumbling vibrations of his mower were, to the thousands of insects inside, the equivalent of an earthquake and a declaration of war. A few angry scouts emerged first, a buzzing vanguard of black and yellow fury. George, annoyed, swatted at them dismissively, a gesture he would come to regret for the rest of his very short life. To the hornet colony, this was not a nuisance, it was a direct assault. An alarm pheromone, an invisible chemical scream for backup, was instantly released, and the nest erupted. It was not a swarm. It was a living, breathing, shrieking cloud of pure, concentrated rage. Hundreds, then thousands of hornets poured out, a shimmering black and yellow carpet of death that immediately engulfed him. The low drone of his lawnmower was completely swallowed by the deafening, high-pitched roar of thousands of angry wings. He abandoned the mower and ran, but there was nowhere to go. He was the sole target of their unified, overwhelming fury. They stung him relentlessly, through his clothes, on his face, in his hair, 100 tiny venom-injecting daggers working in perfect, terrifying unison. A single hornet sting is an excruciating experience. A dozen can be a medical emergency. To be stung hundreds of times in the span of a few seconds is a lethal event. The massive, overwhelming dose of venom being pumped directly into his bloodstream triggered a catastrophic systemic reaction. His body's immune system, faced with an unprecedented onslaught, went into complete meltdown. He went into anaphylactic shock, his blood pressure cratering, his airways swelling shut, his organs beginning to fail under the toxic load. His peaceful, suburban Saturday had transformed into a scene from a horror movie, a brutal, one-sided battle against a perfectly organized, highly efficient insect army. He had unknowingly trespassed on their territory, and they had defended their home with an absolute, terrifying, and fatal efficiency. Alright, forget picking the dumbest. That's too easy. I want you to tell me in the comments, which person on this list died from the most avoidable mistake? I'm talking about the one death that a single, functioning brain cell could have prevented. Let's see what you pick. If you're glad your brain cells are still firing, hit that like button and subscribe for more.